Pokemon is old enough to have been on several different consoles over the past near 30 years, and everyone has a console that comes to mind first when they think of the series. For OG fans, it might be the Game Boy Color, but for newer fans, it could be the Nintendo Switch with its larger, newer library of games. But looking at the title of the video, I want to determine what console was the best for Pokemon games. Which console introduced the best library for the IP? This is not just for core games, but spin-offs too, which can be a game changer for some fans. And just because a certain console may have the best game in your opinion, doesn't mean you may find it to be the best console overall if it's lacking a larger library of other good games in the series. So I've decided to break this up into two categories, home consoles and portable consoles, since it'd be kind of unfair to rank something like the Wii with the DS for example. The focus of what type of Pokemon games they had was very different, so it'd be unfair to compare. For the Nintendo Switch, we're going to rank it in both portable and home console, to see how it holds up compared to each set of consoles. Also, I'm not going to factor Virtual Console too much. Let's start with the home consoles first, since I feel like they're a little easier to talk about since most of them don't have core games. Unfortunately, at number 5, we have the Wii U. I'm pretty sure this thing had only 2 Pokemon releases of note, Pokemon Rumble U and Pokken Tournament. I haven't played every Pokemon game ever, mind you, so I have to go somewhat off of both fan and critical reception. Rumble U seemed harmless, but a bit too simple. Probably aimed at a younger audience overall, and it made basically no impact as a game. Pokken, on the other hand, is a pretty huge spin-off game for the series, and one both myself and my editor played on the Wii U. It's easily one of the best spin-off games in the series, and even if it's not your thing, you should be very appreciative that something like this was allowed to exist. It never quite hit its potential as a game, unfortunately, but still, I think we should hold a great deal of respect for it and the community that still plays it competitively, however niche it may be in 2025. Sadly, one really solid game is not going to save the Wii U's utterly dry library of Pokemon games. And on top of that, Pokken got ported to the Switch with a better version, really leaving the poor Wii U behind. And it's also really sad that that's the case, because my favorite video game of all time, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker HD, is also on this console. For number 4, we get to a console with a way bigger library, the Wii. The system has at least 6 games to point out. Unfortunately, all of the games are pretty mid. Half of them were also eShop WiiWare games too, meaning they're not even officially available anymore, like Rumble U on the Wii U, I believe. Like, if Pokken wasn't ported to the Switch with a better version, I'd be tempted to put the Wii below the Wii U for this. I'm serious. Pokken smokes everything the Wii has for Pokemon. That being said, I don't think any of the games are outright terrible either, but they didn't really help with the reputation the Wii had for games way too catered to a hyper-casual audience. The one exception is Pokemon Battle Revolution, which many fans criticized at the time for being a bit bare bones in features, specifically single player. It's basically a true battle simulator, even more than Pokemon Stadium, but it was very good at being that battle simulator, and official events would use this game too. So, I have a bit of a soft spot for it, and I consider the highlight of the Wii library in terms of the console's legacy when it comes to Pokemon. If you like games like Pokepark, My Pokemon Ranch, and the Wii's version of Mystery Dungeon, that's fine. I just think they're okay. Harmless, but they always came off as filler, semi-experimental games to a lot of us at the time. There's definitely a bit of a trend here, because at number 3, we continue to go backwards with the GameCube. Now, I know the Wii is backwards compatible with the GameCube, but I'm factoring the library introduced with the console, not merely what you can play on it. And I think the GameCube has a slight edge over the Wii despite having less games. It has a lot of utility stuff like the Ruby and Sapphire box thing, but overall, it only really has 3 games, so to speak, on it. It really shows how, during this period, they slowed down just a wee bit with how much Pokemon they were putting out on their consoles all at once after the excess of the series' initial explosion. The 3 games, of course, are Pokemon Colosseum, XD Gale of Darkness, and Channel. And Channel feels more like half game, half DVD special. So it's mostly the first 2 that people think about. And those 2 games are definitely way closer to what people want from Pokemon console games than what we got on the Wii. Honestly, Pokemon Channel also has a lot more personality to me than a lot of the stuff we've brought up, as I played it a lot as a kid. Regardless, even with just Colosseum and XD, I think that's enough to rank over the empty Wii U category and a bit of a dry Wii library. I haven't played these in a really long time, so it's hard to judge how well they hold up. And I'm aware there is a decent bit of a fan base that finds these games pretty flawed. But most of us would rather play these than everything else mentioned. Except for maybe Pokken Tournament, depending on your enjoyment of fighting games. Continuing to go back in the catalog of Nintendo consoles, we have the N64 in our second place spot for home consoles. This feels a little weird because none of the N64 games feel as unique as the GameCube ones in my opinion. But I think they're mostly pretty good, and there are just more of them on top of that. Stadium 1 and 2 are sort of in between Battle Revolution and the GameCube games in style. They're definitely mostly battle simulators, but they give you much more of a goal than Battle Revolution to progress through, but don't really have the typical RPG adventure elements of the GameCube games. There's no narrative or anything, it just goes straight to the point, battling under competitive rules. I'm not sure if I'd say Stadium 1 and 2 are better than the GameCube games, but they did offer more than I remembered back when we made those Stadium videos. Because not only did they have some really memorable mini games you could play with your friends, but you could just straight up play Gen 1 and 2 on the N64 with the Stadium games, which I believe is the reason it was one of the most expensive N64 games, since it came with that transfer pack. But unlike the GameCube, the N64 has other pretty good games on top of ones that feature traditional battles. Pokemon Snap hit the West before Stadium did, and it's pretty decent. Then there's Pokemon Puzzle League, which was again a decent game. Though, I wish it had a little more content besides the puzzle stuff, like how Stadium had a bunch of minigame modes in the transfer pack stuff. Then there's Hey You Pikachu, which is kind of seen as the predecessor to Pokemon Channel. It's weird. I can't call it a truly bad game, just an acquired taste. Like Channel, it's not super interactive. I wasn't really expecting the N64 to make number 2 for home consoles, but in hindsight, it had some good stuff. And of course, at the top of home consoles is the Nintendo Switch. The Switch has core games dating back to Let's Go, which is technically still Gen 7. It also had a new Pokemon Snap game and a port of Pokken Tournament with new content. I'm not factoring the games from the online pass for this either, like the incomplete versions of Pokemon Stadium, just the Switch games. So it gets a bunch of core games, one of the best spin-offs, and a remake of Mystery Dungeon 2. Not all of these are going to be winners for us, of course. A lot of people didn't like that Detective Pikachu sequel, and I'm not the biggest Sword and Shield fan. But it is still a pretty standard core game experience with a lot of content and online play and stuff. It's kind of not hard to put this at number 1. But is it the best in the portable consoles category? I guess we'll have to see. I think with the portables, all of them are pretty loved by Pokemon fans. So it makes deciding on what is last controversial no matter what the answer is. It's also tough because none of the 5 portable consoles to list are bad at all for Pokemon, but some just have more than others. And unfortunately, it means I have to put one of the coolest consoles ever at the bottom of this part of the list, the Game Boy Advance. Now hold on, please God put the pitchforks down. It's only by technicality. Every GBA Pokemon game is good. The problem is they just didn't make that many games for it. The GBA did not have a long run as the premier Nintendo portable, because the DS was already out by 2004. That's not to say the GBA library as a whole is small, it's just smaller than usual for Pokemon. It only had 4 major releases: RSC, FRLG, Pokemon Pinball Sequel, and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team. I honestly didn't even fully realize how few Pokemon games there were, but they're all pretty solid. It's better than every home console listed except for the Switch. And I do recommend the GBA over the Game Boy Color as an actual machine as well, since the backwards compatibility is perfect. But again, we're only counting the games introduced by the Game Boy Advance. Unfortunately, the competition is stiff, and that means arguably the most iconic handheld ever is sitting down at 4th. It's crazy how long the original Game Boy's run was compared to the GBA. It was definitely helped by the addition of the Game Boy Color version of it, which even had exclusive games. The Game Boy Color goes over the Game Boy Advance simply because it has more Pokemon games on it. And like the Game Boy Advance, they're actually all good once again. If I had to pick the weakest, it would maybe be the original Pokemon Pinball, but that's still a pretty decent game. I've also never played the Pokemon TCG sequel, as it was only a Japanese-only release. But I've heard almost nothing but good things about it. Apparently, it's even better than the first one, and the first one is straight up one of the most complete spin-off titles in this series as is. I think it only helps that even though there are still only 2 core games, they're both original and 2 different generations. On the GBA, we only have Gen 3. Both great, but the jump between Hoenn and the reimagined Kanto didn't feel quite as fresh as going from Gen 1 to 2. It's 3 for 3DS, because it takes our 3rd spot. Honestly, this feels kinda dirty, because I like the 3DS core Pokemon games more than the Switch personally. But god, the non-core games on the 3DS are all over the place compared to the last 2 consoles. Detective Pikachu is an okay game for kids, but it's pretty short and it doesn't offer much replay value. Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity is seen as pretty disappointing compared to previous entries. And Super Mystery Dungeon is better, but is often still not seen as fondly as the DS and GBA games, though they are both probably still miles ahead of most of the Wii library, so take that as you will. Rumble Blast is pretty bare bones, though the cover is super cute, so it's hard to be too mean to it. Then there's Art Academy, which I have read nice things about, but it's more of an educational game. Still, I was looking around, and it seems like people did get quite a bit out of it. So the spin-offs are pretty diverse here, and not bad. But it's the core games that put it ahead of the Game Boy consoles. 4 whole Pokemon games with X and Y, or S, Sun and Moon, and Ultra Sun and Moon. I know X and Y is sometimes seen as a weaker entry, but it still did a lot mechanically for this series and is overall a decent RPG. The other 3 games are overall really good in my opinion. When it comes to personal preference, I actually would have put the 3DS in the number 2 position instead because I prefer these core games over the Switch ones, especially Alola. But I'm trying to be as objective as possible here. And in the end, there are factors I'll get into that keep us at number 3. As you can probably tell, it's the Switch at number 2. I'll keep this as short as I can since we talked about it already. While I think the core games aren't quite as strong as the 3DS games, they are again, at worst, decent standard RPGs, with Legends Arceus being the standout among the Switch games in hindsight. However, not only does the Switch have 5 core games, not counting the upcoming Legends ZA, but it has better spin-offs too. Pokemon New Snap is pretty decent. The Mystery Dungeon remaster was faithful. And of course, it has the ideal version of Pokken Tournament. Again, I cannot emphasize how major of a spin-off Pokken is to have on top of everything else. It was the final deciding factor to put it over the 3DS. So if Pokken Tournament never got ported out of the Wii U, this probably would have been under the 3DS. And last, and maybe predictably, is the original Nintendo DS. I really do think this introduced the strongest lineup of Pokemon games ever on a single system. It also just had a lot of Pokemon on it. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Blue Rescue Team, Explorers of Time and Darkness, Explorers of Sky, the best spin-off by the way, 3 Pokemon Ranger games, Pokemon Conquest. You may not like all of these equally, but you can't deny these are a much heavier lineup of spin-offs compared to the other consoles. Now, not everything is good on it. Pokemon Dash kinda sucks. Troze seems okay, but not as interesting as the rest. Then there's the core games. Diamond Pearl Platinum, HGSS, Black and White, and Black and White 2. I don't think a single one of these is less than a stone cold classic. The only rough patch is Diamond and Pearl, and they have pacing issues among a few other rough patches before Platinum polished it up more. Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Black and White, and Black and White 2 are considered by many to be some of the best Pokemon games. Like, you can't go wrong with these core games on the DS. So when you look at the rest of the DS library, it's not hard to pick this as number 1 above all portables and home consoles. If anything, they could have slowed down a little bit with all the Pokemon and let development time for 1 or 2 of them sink in for a little longer instead. But overall, even in a landscape of tons of other great JRPGs being on the console, Pokemon ruled the Nintendo DS era. And those are what we think are the best home and portable consoles for Pokemon games. The result is a bit different from my personal favorite consoles and games, but I tried to be fair to everything. The Game Boy Advance, for example, definitely ranks higher as far as my preferences go. Like, way higher. But anyway, what do you think? What do you think is the best console era for Pokemon? And which is your personal favorite? Let me know down below in the comments.